What if the greatest royal love story of the century was never really about love at all? What if the fairy tale wedding, the palace balcony kisses, and the endless speeches about finding freedom were nothing more than the opening act of a much darker play? Imagine waking up one day to realize the partner you thought you knew, someone you defended, protected, and even abandoned your family for, was never in it for you. They were in it for the spotlight, for fame, for Hollywood. That, according to Prince Harry's own words, is the truth behind his shattered marriage with Meghan Markle. And if that doesn't shake you to your core, just wait, because the revelations he's begun to spill are unlike anything we've ever heard before. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the royal frame, she was presented to the world as a breath of fresh air. A biracial American actress stepping into one of the oldest monarchies in the world. On paper, it was the stuff of legend. The press called it modern, progressive, and revolutionary. But behind the gilded gates, whispers began immediately. Whispers that Meghan wasn't in love with the man so much as she was in love with the crown. That whispers have now turned into Harry's own admissions. He's finally broken his silence, and the picture he paints is devastating. Do you remember how the narrative was sold to us back in 2020? Harry and Meghan told the world they were leaving because of safety, because of mental health, because of the oppressive pressures of royal life. They wanted freedom, peace, a quiet life to raise their children. That's what we were told. But Harry has now confessed it wasn't about safety at all. It was about celebrity. Meghan's celebrity. Her craving for red carpets, deals, and cameras. And Harry, blinded by love, followed her into exile, an exile he now deeply regrets. But here's the question. If this confession is true, what does it mean for the monarchy? For his children? For the legacy of Princess Diana, the woman Harry always said he wanted to protect? This isn't just about one marriage collapsing. It's about a royal fracture that has torn through generations. It's about betrayal at the highest level. And it's about Harry finally waking up to a truth he ignored for years. Now let's rewind. Let's revisit those carefully orchestrated interviews, those glossy magazine covers, those emotional sound bites. Meghan told us it was unbearable, that she wasn't protected, that the palace shut her out. And Harry, standing by her side, nodded in agreement. They painted a picture of escape, of a young couple running from danger into freedom. But if Harry's new confession is right, then even those interviews weren't about sharing their pain. They were about marketing a new brand. Meghan's brand. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of what we were told was ever real? Was it a carefully spun narrative from the start? Or did Meghan seize her moment once she realized she could use Harry's vulnerability as her ticket to Hollywood royalty? Here's the irony. Harry always said he didn't want to become his mother, hounded by paparazzi, destroyed by the press. But in his desperate attempt to protect Meghan, he walked straight into the trap Diana feared most, being manipulated for image, for celebrity, for fame. And now, years later, he's standing before the world saying, it was never about safety. Think about the weight of those words. And here's where it gets even more chilling. Insiders have long claimed Meghan's exit plan was mapped out well before she married Harry. That deals, contacts, and Hollywood connections were already being lined up while the world was celebrating their Windsor wedding. At the time, those claims were dismissed as tabloid gossip. But now, with Harry's own regretful admissions, the puzzle pieces suddenly fit. Ask yourself this. Was Harry truly blindsided? Or deep down, did he always know? Did he silence his doubts because love, or what he thought was love, was too powerful? Haven't we all been there at some point? Ignoring the red flags, convincing ourselves we're the exception, not the rule? That's the tragedy here. Harry wasn't just a prince. He was a man hopelessly in love. And Meghan knew exactly how to play that. Think about the timing of their exit. Just when Meghan's acting career was fading, just when her Hollywood relevance was slipping, she marries into the most famous family in the world. Within 2 years, she orchestrates a departure that positions her not as a struggling actress, but as a global icon. Coincidence? Or carefully staged? Harry's confession suggests it was the latter. But let's not forget the cost. For Harry, it meant sacrificing ties with his father, King Charles. It meant destroying his bond with Prince William, once his closest ally. It meant becoming a stranger in his own homeland. All for a dream that was never his to begin with. And now, as the divorce looms, he's left asking himself the question we're all asking. Was it worth it? The emotion here is heavy. You can almost picture Harry sitting alone, reflecting on how he traded centuries of tradition, loyalty, and duty for what? A Netflix deal? A Spotify podcast that failed? A red carpet appearance that faded as quickly as it came? The irony is painful. The man who wanted freedom found himself shackled to Meghan's ambitions. And yet, here's the cruelest twist. Harry says he regrets turning his back on the crown. But regret doesn't undo the damage. His words can't restore the trust that's been broken. They can't erase the sting of betrayal felt by William, Charles, or even the British public who once adored him. And Meghan? She's already on the next stage of her life, perhaps exactly where she always wanted to be. Now, if you're wondering why this story matters today, here's your answer. Because Harry's confession changes the narrative. It forces us to reevaluate everything we've been told over the past 5 years. It makes us question the interviews, the books, the documentaries, the speeches. Was it all theater? Were we all just part of Meghan's audience, unknowingly applauding her performance? And it's not just about the royals. It's about us, the viewers, the readers, the public who believed in the love story. Because if this can happen at the highest level of society, with all the resources, advisors, and warnings in the world, what does it say about how easily any of us can be deceived? Here's where I'll leave you, for now. The divorce confirmation is shocking enough. But the real bombshell isn't the split. It's the revelation that Meghan allegedly plotted their exit long before Harry ever realized. That this was never about survival, never about safety, always about celebrity. And once you hear who first warned Harry about Meghan's true intentions, you'll understand just how deep this betrayal really runs. Who was it? Who dared to whisper to Harry that Meghan wasn't the woman she appeared to be? Imagine the sting of hearing someone close to you, someone you trust, lean in and warn. Be careful. She's not in this for love. That's exactly what Harry faced. And the most shocking part? Those words didn't come from tabloids, strangers, or distant critics. They came from inside the palace walls, from people who had watched Meghan up close, day after day, long before the world believed in the fairy tale. Think about the gravity of that. These weren't enemies of the couple. These weren't bitter outsiders. These were individuals who had pledged their lives to the service of the monarchy. People who had no reason to lie. And yet, they sounded alarms that Harry, blinded by devotion, chose to silence. Have you ever ignored advice because it was easier to believe in your own heart than in cold, hard warnings? That's what Harry did. The first warning came quietly. A senior aide, seasoned and loyal, reportedly confided to Harry that Meghan's ambitions seemed unusually polished. Not the dreams of a woman ready to serve, but the desires of a woman hungry for recognition. Harry bristled. He dismissed it as prejudice, as old-fashioned snobbery. And perhaps you can sympathize. Who wouldn't defend the person they love? But here's the tragedy. That aide would later watch the very scenario they feared unfold before the world's eyes. But the whispers didn't stop there. Even Prince William, Harry's own brother, is said to have urged caution. Not out of jealousy, not out of cruelty, but out of brotherly concern. Take your time, William advised. Don't rush this. Simple words. Honest words. But in Harry's ears, they sounded like betrayal. Meghan had convinced him that the family didn't understand her, didn't accept her. And so William's advice, meant as a shield, was cast aside as an attack. Have you noticed how manipulation often works by isolating you from those who care most? That's what was happening. And then came another voice. A friend from Harry's circle. Someone who had seen Meghan's Hollywood connections, who had heard whispers from her past. They warned Harry that Meghan wasn't done with acting. That royal life wasn't her dream, it was her stage. Did Harry listen? No. He brushed it off as gossip, as envy, as noise. After all, hadn't Meghan told him she was ready to devote herself to duty? Hadn't she smiled in interviews and spoken of service, of compassion, of giving back? Of course she had. She knew the lines. She knew the performance. This is where the contradiction becomes almost unbearable. On one hand, Harry wanted desperately to believe he had found his soulmate, his partner in arms against the world. On the other, everywhere he turned, trusted voices told him something was wrong. Which would you believe? The person who shares your bed, whispers in your ear, promises forever? Or the friends and family who claim they see something you can't? Harry made his choice. He chose Meghan. He ignored the warnings. And one by one, those who had tried to protect him fell silent, defeated. Because once a man convinces himself of his own truth, no evidence, no caution, no plea can penetrate. But the irony cuts deep. Today, those warnings ring louder than ever. Harry himself has begun to admit that the people he shut out, the ones he accused of not supporting him, were right all along. Imagine the weight of that realization. Imagine the guilt, the shame, the regret. And yet, it wasn't only the royals and aides who saw the danger. Meghan's own family, estranged though they were, spoke out early. Thomas Markle, Samantha Markle, even extended relatives, they all claimed Meghan had always been driven by fame. At the time, the world dismissed them. Of course they would say that, right? Jealousy, bitterness, sour grapes. But now, with Harry's confession, their words take on new life. Were they all telling the same uncomfortable truth? Still, the most chilling warnings weren't about Meghan's fame-seeking. They were about something else. Something darker. A coldness. A calculation. The way she moved pieces on the board long before Harry realized there was even a game being played. One insider compared it to chess. Every move she made had an endgame in sight. Doesn't that give you chills? But perhaps the most devastating part for Harry wasn't just the warnings themselves. It was the way Meghan framed those warnings. She told Harry again and again that the royals didn't like her, that they'd never accept her. She painted herself as the victim, the outsider, the one being persecuted. And Harry, haunted by his mother's tragic story, rushed to defend her. He saw history repeating itself. He saw Diana's suffering in Meghan's tears. But here's the question. Were those tears genuine, or were they the performance of a lifetime? If you've ever been in love, you know how powerful emotion can be. It blinds you. It deafens you. It convinces you to fight battles that aren't even yours. That's what happened to Harry. His love became his prison. Meghan didn't have to isolate him. He did it himself, cutting ties, ignoring friends, dismissing advisors. And once he crossed that line, there was no turning back. Here's where the story twists even further. Some say Harry was warned not once, not twice, but dozens of times. Each warning louder than the last. Each ignored with greater fury. Why? Because admitting doubt meant admitting weakness. And Harry, who had always fought to prove himself in a family that adored William, couldn't bear to be wrong. So he doubled down, again and again. But now, years later, with divorce looming, Harry admits the truth. He was wrong. The warnings were right. Meghan had a plan, a vision, a dream, and he was simply a piece of it. Can you imagine that moment of clarity? Can you imagine realizing that the very people you cut off were the ones trying to save you? This is the tragedy of Harry's story. Not just betrayal, but betrayal foretold. A fall from grace that could have been avoided, if only he had listened. If only he had seen. But here's the cruel part. Love doesn't let us see until it's too late. And so, we are left with one haunting question. If the warnings were so clear, so numerous, so undeniable, what exactly was Meghan planning that made them so urgent? What secret endgame had those insiders sensed long before the public did? Because the whispers weren't just about her character. They weren't just about fame. They were about a carefully scripted plan, one that would soon shake the monarchy to its very core. What kind of love story begins with a red carpet and ends with a script? That's the question people inside the palace began asking as they pieced together Meghan Markle's moves. From the outside, it looked like a whirlwind romance. But behind the scenes, insiders say it looked more like a Hollywood production, complete with rehearsed lines, calculated steps, and a leading man who had no idea he was just part of someone else's script. Think back to Meghan's past. A woman who had worked for years in television, always one step away from true stardom, always chasing the next role. Suits gave her recognition, yes, but not household fame. Not the kind that opens every door in Hollywood. And then suddenly, she's in the orbit of a prince. A global brand in human form. The cameras, the lights, the headlines, all fell at her feet. Do you think that kind of opportunity just happened? Or was it seized with both hands, long before the wedding bells rang? Here's the first twist. Palace staff noticed Meghan wasn't just adjusting to royal life, she was rewriting it. While previous brides spent years easing into their roles, Meghan immediately took control. She planned interviews, orchestrated appearances, and cultivated an image that looked less like a duchess and more like a celebrity. It felt like Hollywood followed her into the palace, one aide reportedly said. And Harry? He thought it was fresh, modern, progressive. He mistook ambition for authenticity. Let's pause here. Have you ever been so swept up in someone's energy that you mistake it for love? The late-night calls, the grand gestures, the fiery speeches, they blind you. That's what Harry experienced. He mistook Meghan's drive for devotion, her strategies for sincerity, and in doing so, he failed to see the bigger plan forming around him. Because here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. The exit wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a sudden decision made under pressure. According to Harry's own regrets, Meghan had mapped out their departure long before the headlines screamed Megxit. She didn't stumble into California dreaming. She was aiming for it all along. Think about the timeline. Just months after the wedding, Meghan was already in talks with Hollywood contacts. Her team quietly re-engaged with old agents and industry players. People who had once considered her a mid-tier actress suddenly found themselves dealing with a duchess. And with that title, every door opened. Every conversation carried weight. Isn't that convenient? But the most damning piece comes from Harry's confession. He now admits the royal exit was presented to him as a solution to protect Meghan, when in reality, it was the very outcome she had orchestrated. It wasn't about safety. It was about celebrity. That's not just a contradiction. It's betrayal at its purest form. The signs were everywhere. Meghan's insistence on high-profile interviews. Her push for deals outside palace approval. Her frustration when royal traditions limited her visibility. Each time, Harry defended her. Each time, he told himself this was love. But in hindsight, those were rehearsals for the life she truly wanted, the Hollywood stage. And here's where irony bites. Harry thought they were building a new path together. In reality, he was helping Meghan return to the path she'd never abandoned. Every move they made, every photo, every headline, every speech, was a brick in the road back to California. And Harry walked it willingly, never realizing he was being led. Let me ask you, can you imagine that moment of realization? Sitting across from your spouse, hearing the words that confirm your greatest fear, that the sacrifices you made were never about love, but about leverage? Harry's face, when he finally admitted this, says it all. The pain of knowing the fairy tale wasn't just broken, it was fabricated. And yet, here's the contradiction that twists the knife even deeper. Meghan often spoke about duty, compassion, and wanting a quiet life. But her actions screamed something else entirely. Netflix deals, podcast contracts, red carpet returns. None of it quiet. None of it hidden. All of it public. All of it glamorous. So which was the truth? The speeches about service? Or the headlines about Hollywood? This is where the betrayal burns brightest. Harry admits he ignored the timeline. He ignored the coincidences. He ignored the way Meghan's ambitions aligned perfectly with their departure. Because love makes you do that. Love convinces you to believe the lie, even when the truth is staring you in the face. But what makes this even more heartbreaking is that Meghan's plan wasn't just about leaving the palace. It was about replacing it with something bigger, bolder, more profitable. The monarchy may have been ancient, but Hollywood was global. And with Harry by her side, Meghan wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a brand, a duchess-turned-star, the role of a lifetime. So ask yourself, was this ever about building a life together? Or was Harry simply the key to unlock the fame Meghan always wanted? Because if Harry's confession is true, the answer is devastating. He wasn't her partner. He was her stepping stone. And here's the final sting. If Meghan had this plan all along, how many others knew? How many of those palace warnings weren't just speculation, but quiet knowledge of a strategy unfolding in plain sight? Because if that's true, then Harry's story isn't just one of betrayal. It's one of willful blindness. The exit was scripted. The plan was rehearsed. The betrayal was years in the making. And yet, the cruelest irony is still to come. Because the reasons Meghan and Harry gave for leaving, the stories they told the world, were never the real reasons at all. And that's where we turn next. Because the lie at the heart of Megxit wasn't just about timing. It was about motive. And when Harry revealed what it was truly about, everything we thought we knew came crashing down. What if the greatest lie wasn't the timing of their departure, but the very reason they gave for it? For years, Meghan and Harry told the world it was about safety, about security, about the unbearable weight of royal life. But Harry has now admitted, those explanations were nothing more than a carefully crafted cover story. It was never about safety, he confesses. It was always about celebrity. Let that sink in for a moment. Safety. That word was their shield, their justification, the single explanation that silenced critics and won public sympathy. Who could argue against a couple fleeing danger? Who could condemn parents wanting to protect their children? But here's the twist. According to Harry's own regretful confession, it was all theater. An excuse. A smokescreen. The truth was far more cynical. Meghan wanted Hollywood, not Windsor. She wanted cameras on her terms, not the Crown's. Think about the contradiction here. Meghan claimed the media's attention was unbearable, that the spotlight was destroying her. Yet, what did she do the moment they left? She ran straight into another spotlight, the brighter, harsher, more demanding glare of Hollywood. Netflix deals, Oprah interviews, magazine covers, paparazzi setups. This wasn't escape. This was escalation. Doesn't that strike you as ironic? And what about Harry? He always said he was haunted by Diana's story, that he wanted to protect Meghan from the same fate. He told us it was about shielding his wife. Yet now he admits that protection was never the real motive. It was branding, fame, celebrity. That revelation doesn't just shatter their narrative. It shatters Harry's credibility. If he lied about safety, what else was a lie? Here's where things get even more shocking. Remember when Meghan said she wanted peace? That she longed for privacy? Those words became memes, didn't they? People mocked the contradiction of demanding privacy while signing multi-million-dollar deals. But now, Harry himself has validated the criticism. Privacy was never the goal. Fame was. It makes you wonder, did Meghan ever intend to live quietly? Or was that just another role she played to win public sympathy? The saddest part is how easily the world believed it. Safety was a perfect story. It evoked Diana's tragedy. It tugged on heartstrings. It made critics look cruel, like heartless bullies attacking a woman in danger. Meghan and Harry framed themselves as victims, and millions of people rallied to their side. But now, those same supporters feel betrayed. If this was never about safety, then weren't we all manipulated too? And here's where the emotional weight hits hardest. Harry admits he regrets turning his back on the crown because of this lie. He regrets abandoning duty, family, and history for a narrative that wasn't even true. Imagine carrying that burden. Imagine knowing your choices fractured your family, your nation, and your legacy, not because of danger, but because of ambition. But let's dig deeper. Why safety? Why was that the story they chose to sell? Because safety is universal. It's relatable. Everyone fears for their family's well-being. Everyone understands wanting to protect loved ones. It was the perfect disguise for a much uglier truth. Meghan didn't leave to protect her family. She left to project her brand. And Harry, blinded by devotion, repeated the script. And yet, here's the cruel irony. By leaving under the guise of safety, they actually made themselves less safe. Stripped of royal protection, living in a mansion with security costs soaring, dependent on deals to fund their lifestyle. Doesn't that reveal the hollowness of the excuse? If safety had truly been the concern, they would have stayed within the palace system. Instead, they walked away into greater risk, all for celebrity. Let me ask you directly, do you feel misled? Because that's the core of this chapter. The betrayal wasn't just Harry's. It wasn't just the monarchy's. It was ours. The public believed their story. We defended them, argued over them, even pitted them. And now we learn it was a performance, an illusion, a mask hiding Meghan's Hollywood ambition. And yet, even knowing all this, the question lingers. Why would Harry go along with it? Why repeat the lines if deep down he sensed the truth? That's where love becomes the cruelest weapon. He wanted so badly to protect her, to believe in her, that he convinced himself the lie was real. And by the time he realized it wasn't, it was too late. The bridges were burned. The ties were severed. And the crown he abandoned no longer wanted him back. But here's where the story darkens further. If the safety narrative was false, what else in Meghan and Harry's public crusade was fabricated? Were the tears and interviews real or rehearsed? Were the claims of silence and rejection genuine, or another layer of the script? If safety was a cover, then every word becomes suspect. And that's the most dangerous betrayal of all. Because once trust is broken, it can never truly be repaired. And so, the mask slips. The excuse collapses. And Harry, years later, finally admits the truth. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about security. It wasn't about mental health. It was always about celebrity. And the very admission leaves a chilling question hanging in the air. If Meghan manipulated the narrative of their exit, what else did she manipulate along the way? Because according to Harry's confession, the safety excuse was only one part of the performance. The bigger betrayals, the ones that cut deepest, were yet to come. And Meghan's next move would prove exactly that. What happens when the dream you were promised turns out to be a carefully staged performance? That's exactly where Harry found himself the moment they set foot in California. Because the second they landed, Meghan wasn't retreating into a quiet life. She was stepping directly onto the stage she had been preparing for all along. And the stage wasn't Windsor. It wasn't duty. It wasn't service. It was Hollywood. Let's look at the contradiction. Meghan had told the world she wanted peace, privacy, a safe space for her children. Yet the very first thing she did was step into the heart of America's entertainment capital. Not a quiet countryside retreat, not a hidden sanctuary, but Los Angeles, the land of billboards, premieres, and paparazzi. Does that sound like safety? Or does it sound like a woman chasing the fame she'd been denied before she ever met Harry? Ask yourself, why California? Why not Canada, where they first retreated? Why not a quieter, less glamorous city? The answer is simple. California wasn't a coincidence. It was the plan all along. Friends from Meghan's past have said she always dreamed of building an empire there. And now, with Harry by her side, doors opened instantly. Netflix called. Spotify called. Every major network wanted a piece of them. The royal titles became leverage. The brand exploded. Here's the cruel irony. Harry thought they had escaped the cage of the palace. But in reality, they had walked into another cage, one made of contracts, cameras, and deadlines. Meghan thrived in it. Harry floundered. He had traded one prison for another, and this one didn't even carry the dignity of royal duty. Think about the image shift. In Britain, Meghan had been expected to serve charities, patronages, events. In California, she became the celebrity duchess. She wasn't cutting ribbons, she was cutting deals. She wasn't meeting dignitaries, she was meeting producers. Do you see the pattern? Every step was toward fame, not service. And Harry? He followed, still clinging to the illusion of partnership. And here's where the emotional spike hits. Those close to Harry say he began to notice the changes. Meghan's schedule wasn't about family, it was about publicity. Photo shoots, magazine spreads, carefully staged paparazzi moments. And Harry? More and more, he became a background figure. The prince, once one of the most famous men in the world, was reduced to Meghan's husband. Doesn't that sting? But here's the bigger betrayal. Meghan hadn't just planned for Hollywood success. She had planned for Harry's isolation. By leaving the crown, he left behind everything that defined him. His family, his military ties, his nation. And once he was adrift, what was left? Meghan. She became his anchor, his only world. That is how manipulation works. You cut someone off from their roots, and suddenly you're the only tree they have left to cling to. Let's not forget the financial reality. Without royal support, Harry was dependent on deals. And who was securing those deals? Meghan, her team, her contacts, the very Hollywood machine she'd been feeding all along. Harry wasn't just following her into California. He was stepping into her world, her rules, her ambitions. And once inside, he couldn't leave without losing everything. The tragedy deepens when you realize what Harry gave up for this dream. He gave up the stability of the crown. He gave up his role as a working royal. He gave up the respect of his brother and father. And what did he gain? A podcast that collapsed. A Netflix deal mocked as propaganda. A Hollywood career that seemed to serve Meghan far more than it served him. And yet, here's the darkest twist. Even as their projects faltered, Meghan's celebrity grew. Every interview, every appearance, every staged moment kept her in the headlines. But Harry? He looked smaller, more uncertain, like a man realizing too late that he had been a pawn in a bigger game. Doesn't it make you wonder, did Meghan ever intend for Harry to shine? Or was he always meant to be the background to her spotlight? And here's where the story pulls you in deeper. Meghan's California dreaming wasn't just about personal fame. It was about legacy, building an empire. The books, the documentaries, the merchandise, the brand. It was the Markle empire wrapped in royal packaging. And Harry? He provided the packaging, the titles, the global recognition. Without him, the empire wouldn't exist. That's the cruel truth. Now picture Harry realizing all this. The man who once wore military uniform with pride, who once walked behind his mother's coffin in front of millions, reduced to chasing Hollywood deals. His face plastered on streaming platforms not as a prince, but as a product. And in his heart, the realization grew. This wasn't freedom. It was betrayal. But betrayal has layers. And the deepest layer wasn't the move to California. It wasn't the red carpets. It wasn't even the deals. It was what came next. Because Meghan's biggest betrayal wasn't about geography. It was about loyalty. The loyalty to Harry himself. And when Meghan finally made the move that exposed just how little this was ever about love, Harry's world collapsed completely. What does betrayal look like when it comes not from an enemy, but from the person you trusted most? For Harry, it wasn't just the red carpets, the Hollywood deals, or the staged paparazzi shots. Those were bad enough. The real breaking point came when Meghan's actions revealed something much colder, something that showed she wasn't protecting him, wasn't standing by him, but was willing to throw him under the bus if it meant preserving her own image. Think back to the interviews. Meghan was always polished, always poised, always ready with the lines that would land in headlines the next day. Harry, on the other hand, often seemed uncomfortable, stumbling through his words or echoing Meghan's points. And when backlash came, who bore the brunt of it? Harry. Meghan's image, somehow, always came out intact. Isn't that suspicious? Here's an example that insiders often point to. In private, Meghan reportedly encouraged Harry's anger at the monarchy. She stoked it, reminded him of his mother, compared palace aides to villains. Yet in public, she softened her words, presenting herself as the sympathetic outsider, who looked like the hot-headed rebel. Harry, who looked like the composed victim. Meghan, do you see the pattern? And the media noticed too. Tabloids painted Harry as unhinged, unstable, and manipulated. Meghan, on the other hand, was painted as calculating, yes, but also savvy. Somehow, she kept her reputation intact while Harry's crumbled. Almost as if that was the plan. Almost as if Harry was meant to absorb the damage while Meghan preserved her brand. Now ask yourself, have you ever realized too late that you were being used as a shield? That's exactly what Harry faced. He thought he was protecting Meghan from the press, from the palace, from the world. But in reality, he was the one being sacrificed, again and again, to protect her. Every time criticism came, it landed on Harry. Every time she needed a defender, he was there. And every time the dust settled, it was Harry's image that took the hit, not hers. The emotional toll of this can't be understated. Insiders say Harry began to feel isolated, not just from his family, but from himself. He didn't recognize the man he had become. He had been a soldier, a brother, a son, a prince. Now, he was Meghan's mouthpiece, her defender, her shield. And the more he defended her, the more the world turned against him. Isn't that the cruelest irony? And then came the ultimate betrayal. The moment Meghan made it clear she wasn't just willing to let Harry take the fall, she was willing to move on without him if it suited her ambitions. According to whispers close to the couple, Meghan began exploring projects, appearances, and even potential partnerships where Harry's presence wasn't necessary. Think about that. The man she had promised forever to was suddenly optional. An accessory. Disposable. That realization reportedly shattered Harry. Because up until then, he had convinced himself that all the sacrifices were for their shared dream. But now he saw the truth. It wasn't their dream. It was hers. He wasn't her equal partner. He was her stepping stone. And once he had served his purpose, he could be left behind. Can you imagine that moment? Looking at the person you love, the person you gave everything up for, and realizing they don't need you anymore? That they may never have needed you in the first place, except as a vehicle to their own success? That's the knife Harry says cut the deepest. And it gets worse. Because when Harry finally tried to voice his doubts, when he began to question Meghan's motives, she reportedly turned the tables. She accused him of betrayal, of not supporting her, of being weak. Classic manipulation. Suddenly, Harry wasn't the victim, he was the problem. And once again, he silenced himself. This is where the story stops being a love story at all. It becomes a cautionary tale. A tale of how love can blind us, how ambition can disguise itself as devotion, how manipulation can look like loyalty, until the mask slips. And for Harry, the mask slipped in the most brutal way. Because Meghan's biggest betrayal wasn't about leaving the palace. It wasn't about chasing Hollywood. It wasn't even about dragging him into lies about safety and celebrity. Her biggest betrayal was showing him, through her actions, that he was expendable, that she could move forward with or without him, that the fairy tale didn't need the prince once the castle had been left behind. And that, more than anything, was the moment Harry says his marriage truly began to unravel. But here's the chilling part. If Meghan was willing to let Harry take the fall, if she was willing to sideline him once he served his purpose, what did that mean for his family? For his children? For the monarchy he abandoned? Because Meghan's influence didn't just cost Harry his image. It cost him his place in history. And the breaking point, the one moment that forced Harry to confront all of this, was closer than anyone realized. What finally snaps a man who has endured years of whispers, warnings, and quiet humiliations? For Harry, the breaking point wasn't a single argument. It wasn't one explosive fight or a dramatic scene. It was a moment of clarity, a slow-building storm that culminated in a devastating realization. Everything he gave up, everything he fought for, everything he believed in, was gone. And worse, it was gone for nothing. Picture this. Harry sitting alone in the California mansion, scrolling through headlines that mock him, projects falling apart, the press no longer adoring him but ridiculing him. Once the people's prince, now a man seen as weak, manipulated, and lost. He looks back at his choices, walking away from the crown, abandoning his military titles, burning bridges with William, Charles, and even the late Queen Elizabeth. And for what? For deals that failed. For a marriage built on ambition. For a love story that, by his own admission, was never truly about love at all. The moment of breaking came when Harry realized he had no home. Not in California, not in Britain, not even in his own marriage. He was a man without a nation, without a family, without a role. That's when regret set in, like a shadow he couldn't shake. Have you ever felt that gut-wrenching moment when you realize you've been fighting for the wrong thing all along? That's what Harry faced. But the breaking point didn't come quietly. It came with confrontation. Insiders say Harry finally snapped during a heated exchange with Meghan, when he accused her of using him, of caring more about Hollywood than their family. Meghan, rather than reassure him, reportedly lashed back. She told him he was ungrateful, that everything they had, the mansion, the deals, the spotlight, was because of her. Imagine hearing that from the woman you gave up a kingdom for. That was the knife twisting in Harry's chest. And here's where the emotion spikes. Harry had spent years defending Meghan to his family, insisting she was misunderstood, insisting she was mistreated. He cut off William, dismissed Charles, and distanced himself from his grandmother, all because Meghan convinced him they were the enemy. And now, in this moment of breaking, he realized it wasn't the monarchy that betrayed him. It wasn't the press. It wasn't the crown. It was Meghan. Think of the contradiction. Meghan said she wanted freedom, yet Harry felt more trapped than ever. Meghan said she wanted privacy, yet Harry had never been more exposed. Meghan said she wanted family, yet Harry had never felt more alone. How long can a man live in that contradiction before something snaps? This is where the humanity of Harry's story hits hardest. He's not just a prince. He's a son, a brother, a father, a man who wanted to protect his wife and children, but who now admits he failed to protect himself. And in failing himself, he lost everything else. The breaking point was emotional, yes, but it was also practical. Harry realized the marriage couldn't be sustained. The fights, the lies, the manipulation, it had reached a point of no return. Divorce wasn't just inevitable. It was survival. And when Harry finally admitted that truth out loud, insiders say it was like a dam breaking. Years of bottled-up regret, anger, and sorrow poured out. But here's the chilling part. Meghan's response to this breaking point wasn't tears. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even denial. It was cold, detached, almost businesslike. She reportedly told Harry that if he couldn't handle the pressure, he could leave, but she wasn't giving up her new life. Let that sink in. She didn't fight for the marriage. She fought for the brand. Can you imagine how that felt? To realize you're not even fighting your spouse for love, but for image, for status, for fame? That was the moment Harry knew the marriage was over, not just emotionally, but spiritually. And yet, even in that breaking point, Harry felt the cruelest twist of all. Because while he was breaking, Meghan was thriving. While his world was collapsing, hers was expanding. And that imbalance, that cruel irony, was the final straw. So, what happens to a man when he finally breaks? When the illusions are gone, the love is exposed as manipulation, and the future he built crumbles before his eyes. He begins to tell the truth. He begins to confess what he ignored. He begins to reveal what was hidden. And Harry, in the wake of his breaking point, started to do exactly that. But the story doesn't end there. Because Meghan's response to his unraveling, her next move, was more shocking than anything before. It didn't just reveal the end of their marriage. It revealed the depth of her betrayal, in a way Harry says he will never forget. What happens when a marriage reaches the point of no return, when every mask has slipped and every illusion has shattered? For Harry, the breaking point should have been the end. But Meghan's response to his unraveling wasn't sorrow, wasn't reconciliation, wasn't even anger. It was something far colder. Something that, according to those close to Harry, made him realize just how deep the betrayal truly went. Because instead of trying to repair the damage, Meghan made her move. A move so calculated, so ruthless, that it exposed what Harry had feared all along. She had never been in it for the marriage. She had been in it for the leverage. Let's rewind for a moment. When Harry's doubts first began to surface, Meghan could have soothed him. She could have reminded him of their love, of their children, of their journey together. Instead, she treated his doubts as weakness. She reportedly told him that he should man up, that he should stop questioning her decisions, and that everything they had achieved was because of her ambition, not his name. Do you hear the irony? The very name, Prince Harry, that opened doors in Hollywood was being dismissed as irrelevant. And then came the real betrayal. Meghan began to step out publicly without Harry, cultivating her own image as a solo force. High-profile appearances where Harry was conspicuously absent. Private meetings with Hollywood power players where Harry wasn't even invited. This wasn't about partnership anymore. It was about Meghan Markle, the brand. The Duchess who no longer needed the Duke. Ask yourself, how would you feel if your spouse began to carve out a life where you no longer mattered? Harry realized he wasn't the center of Meghan's story. He was the supporting character. And worse, he was a supporting character who could be written out at any moment. Insiders say the moment that broke Harry completely was when Meghan began discussing future projects that didn't even involve him. She spoke as if he was optional, one source claimed, as if Harry had already served his purpose. Imagine hearing that. Imagine realizing you had given up your family, your home, your identity, only to become replaceable in the eyes of the woman you did it all for. But Meghan's betrayal didn't stop with sidelining Harry. She reportedly began preparing her next chapter quietly, securing her own networks, ensuring that whether the marriage lasted or not, her future was secured. It was the final confirmation of what Palisades had warned Harry about years earlier. Meghan always had an endgame. And Harry was never the destination. He was the vehicle. Now, here's where the emotional twist cuts deepest. Harry has admitted he regrets ignoring the warnings. But regret doesn't undo betrayal. It doesn't bring back trust. It doesn't repair the fracture in his heart. And for the first time, Harry realized something devastating. Meghan didn't just manipulate their exit. She manipulated him. She used his trauma, his devotion, his fear of losing another woman he loved the way he lost Diana, to pull him further and further from the truth. This realization didn't just end their marriage. It shattered Harry's very identity. Because if the woman he trusted most could betray him so deeply, who was he anymore? A prince without a crown, a husband without a partner, a man without a home. But here's the cruelest twist of all. Meghan's betrayal didn't just hurt Harry. It had ripple effects. His relationships with William, with Charles, even with the late Queen, all were sacrificed on Meghan's altar of ambition. And now, Harry is left to face the fallout alone. So here's the question. If Meghan was willing to betray Harry so openly, so coldly, so ruthlessly, what does that say about the marriage from the very beginning? Was it ever real? Or was the fairy tale always a performance? Because according to Harry, the breaking point was not the end. It was the beginning of truth. And the truth is darker than anyone imagined. And just when Harry thought he had uncovered the full extent of Meghan's betrayal, he stumbled upon something even more devastating. A revelation that didn't just confirm the manipulation, but exposed how long it had been in motion. How long had it all been in motion? That was the question that haunted Harry as the pieces finally began to fall into place. Betrayal hurts in the moment. Yes, but discovering that the betrayal was planned years in advance, that's a different kind of agony. It forces you to look back on every smile, every promise, every "I love you," and ask yourself, was it ever real, or was it all strategy? According to those who knew Meghan before she ever set foot inside the palace, the seeds of this plan were planted long before Harry even proposed. Friends and acquaintances whispered that Meghan had always been ambitious, relentlessly so. She wasn't satisfied with being just another actress, another face in the crowd. She wanted global recognition. She wanted history to remember her. And when the opportunity to date a prince appeared, it wasn't just romance. It was destiny. Or at least, that's how Meghan framed it. Think about the timeline. Before Meghan and Harry were even married, she was reportedly networking with Hollywood contacts, strengthening relationships that would later become invaluable. Producers, agents, media executives, people who had once dismissed her now found her suddenly magnetic. Why? Because she was dating Harry. The royal connection elevated her overnight. And Meghan, sharp as ever, knew exactly how to capitalize on it. Now let's revisit some of those early moments. Meghan's decision to leave her acting career behind was presented as a sacrifice, a gesture of devotion to her new royal life. But in hindsight, does it look like a sacrifice? Or does it look like a calculated rebrand? Because giving up Suits wasn't an ending. It was a pause that gave her time to step into the role of Duchess, win global sympathy, and then relaunch. Not as Meghan Markle, struggling actress, but as Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, international celebrity. This is where the betrayal deepens. Harry now admits that what he thought were spontaneous decisions, like their sudden withdrawal from royal duties, were in fact part of a long-term plan. Meghan, according to him, had always envisioned an exit. The palace was never the goal. It was the stepping stone. And Harry, blinded by love, was the means to that end. Ask yourself, how would you feel if you realized your spouse had been planning an escape route from the very beginning? That the future you imagined together was never the future they wanted at all? For Harry, that realization was devastating. Every argument with William, every fight with Charles, every burned bridge with the palace, suddenly, it wasn't about protecting Meghan. It was about protecting a narrative Meghan had crafted years before. The contradiction here is almost unbearable. Meghan told the world she was unprepared for royal life, that she was blindsided, that she didn't understand the magnitude of the role she stepped into. And yet, evidence suggests she was preparing her exit from day one. Doesn't that sound less like naivety and more like calculation? And here's the twist that few saw coming. Harry admits he ignored warning signs that now seem obvious. Meghan's insistence on controlling the message, her eagerness to secure deals, her frustration with palace restrictions. At the time, Harry dismissed it all as normal growing pains. But now he realizes these weren't struggles. They were rehearsals. Rehearsals for the life Meghan always wanted. This revelation doesn't just expose Meghan's ambitions. It exposes Harry's vulnerability. Because deep down, he always feared being abandoned. The loss of his mother left a scar that never healed. Meghan knew that. She used it. She convinced him that the palace, the press, even his own family were threats to her safety. She made him believe he was saving her. But in reality, he was helping her execute her plan. And when Harry finally saw the truth, that the exit wasn't born out of trauma or fear, but out of ambition, it broke him. Because it meant his sacrifices weren't noble. They weren't heroic. They were foolish. They were the choices of a man who had been played. Now, here's where the story sharpens into its cruelest irony. Meghan's plan worked. She got the fame. She got the headlines. She got the global recognition she always wanted. But Harry? He got regret, isolation, a broken family, a broken marriage. The cost was his, not hers. So here's the chilling question. If Meghan planned the exit long before it happened, what else did she plan? What other parts of their story were scripted? Because once you accept that the biggest decision of their marriage was premeditated, it makes you question everything else. Every interview, every statement, every tear. Was it ever genuine? Or was it all part of the performance? And Harry's confession leaves us on the edge of an even bigger revelation. Because if the exit was scripted, then the reasons they gave for leaving, the interviews, the speeches, the claims of persecution, weren't just exaggerations. They were fabrications. Which means the story we've been told for years wasn't just incomplete. It was false. And when Harry finally admitted what those reasons truly were, it shook the foundations of everything we thought we knew. What if the reasons they gave us, the reasons the world sympathized with, were never real at all? That's where Harry's confession lands like a thunderclap. Because the story we were told, the narrative Meghan and Harry built their brand on, was that they left for their safety, for their peace of mind, for their children's protection. That's what made millions rally to their side. That's what made them victims in the eyes of the world. But Harry has now admitted, it wasn't about safety at all. It was about celebrity. Let that contradiction sit with you. If safety was never the motive, then everything, the interviews, the speeches, the tearful admissions, was part of a performance. A cover story designed to justify what was, in truth, a career move. Think about it. Who would dare criticize a husband for protecting his wife? Who would dare condemn parents for seeking safety for their children? It was the perfect excuse. But it wasn't the truth. Do you remember the Oprah interview? Meghan said she feared for Archie's security, that they weren't being given protection, that the institution refused to help. It was shocking at the time. The world gasped. Politicians weighed in. Celebrities voiced support. But now, in the context of Harry's confession, doesn't it sound different? Doesn't it sound rehearsed? Like lines delivered on a stage, carefully designed to win maximum sympathy? And here's where the betrayal expands beyond Harry. It wasn't just him who was manipulated. It was us, the public, the viewers, the believers. We were drawn into their story, made to feel outrage, compassion, and loyalty, all for a narrative that wasn't real. Haven't you ever felt cheated when you discover a story you believed was a lie? That's what millions feel now. But the irony cuts even deeper. If safety was the excuse, then why leave the only environment that could truly protect them? The palace has centuries of security, protocols, guards, walls. By walking away, Harry and Meghan didn't increase their safety, they decreased it. Suddenly, they were private citizens paying for protection out of pocket, exposed to paparazzi and stalkers. So why call it safety? Because safety sounds noble. Celebrity sounds selfish. That's why. And here's where Harry's confession becomes devastating. He admits he regrets turning his back on the crown. Because now he sees the truth. He didn't walk away to protect Meghan. He walked away to serve Meghan's ambition. He cut off his brother, alienated his father, and even distanced himself from his grandmother, all in the name of safety that never existed. That regret is the weight he carries now, and it's crushing. Ask yourself, how much of their story do you believe now? The mental health claims? The silence they said they faced from palace aides? The accusations of rejection and racism? Were those genuine cries for help, or convenient weapons to justify their exit? If the core motive, safety, was false, then everything around it is cast in doubt. And here's the cruelest irony. Meghan said she wanted to escape the spotlight, that it was destroying her. And yet, where did she run? Straight into the brightest spotlight in the world. Hollywood, paparazzi, red carpets, interviews. If you were fleeing fame, would you go to Los Angeles? Or would you choose somewhere quiet, hidden, safe? The contradiction exposes the truth. It was never about escape. It was about expansion. The pain for Harry is almost unbearable, because it means he sacrificed his entire identity for a story that wasn't real. He traded royal duty for celebrity deals. He traded loyalty for illusion. And now, he stands before the world admitting the cruel truth. It was always about celebrity. But here's where the story twists again. Because Harry's confession doesn't just undermine Meghan's words. It undermines his own. He repeated the lies. He defended the excuses. He sold the narrative. And now, by confessing, he admits he misled the world alongside her. Do you see the contradiction? Harry was both victim and accomplice. Manipulated, but also complicit. That duality is what makes his confession so explosive. And yet, the fallout isn't just about truth. It's about legacy. Because this admission doesn't just expose Meghan's motives. It tarnishes Harry's image forever. No matter what he does now, he will be remembered as the prince who abandoned his family, lied to the world, and then confessed too late. But the revelations don't stop here. Because if safety was a cover, then Meghan's true motives weren't just about celebrity. They were about something bigger, something even colder. A vision for herself that extended beyond Harry, beyond the marriage, beyond the monarchy. And Harry says it was her next move that proved it once and for all. What comes after the mask is stripped away. When the safety excuse collapsed under its own contradictions, Meghan's real motives began to shine through with blinding clarity. And Harry, for the first time, admitted it openly. It wasn't about protection. It was about positioning. Meghan wasn't running from danger. She was running toward opportunity. Toward California. Toward Hollywood. Toward the celebrity life she had always wanted. And the proof? It came the moment their plane wheels touched down in Los Angeles. Think back. They had told the world they needed privacy, that they needed quiet, that they wanted to live outside the glare of the media. Yet where did they go? Not to a secluded European village. Not to a quiet Canadian town. Not even to the African retreat Harry once dreamed of. No, they went straight to California, the entertainment capital of the world. The very epicenter of cameras, red carpets, and flashing lights. Do you believe that was a coincidence? Or was it the destination all along? Within weeks, Meghan and Harry were on the phone with producers, streaming executives, celebrity agents. Netflix, Spotify, Oprah. Every power player in Hollywood suddenly wanted a piece of them. And Meghan was ready. She had her team, her pitches, her image polished. The Duchess of Sussex had become the Hollywood Duchess. This wasn't exile. This was expansion. And here's the tragic part. Harry was swept along in it all. He thought they were building a new life together, far from the palace. But the truth was, Meghan was building her brand. And Harry? He was the accessory. The prince who gave her credibility. The royal title that opened doors. Have you noticed how, in nearly every Hollywood headline, Meghan's name comes first? Meghan and Harry. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. It's not an accident. It's branding. But California wasn't just about fame. It was about control. In the palace, Meghan was constrained. Traditions. Protocols. Senior royals. She couldn't move freely, couldn't monetize, couldn't dictate the narrative. In California, all those chains were gone. She was free to stage paparazzi shots, sign contracts, and present herself as the voice of modern womanhood. Meghan didn't just escape the monarchy, she escaped accountability. Let's pause here. Imagine you're Harry. You've left everything you've ever known, your family, your home, your duty, because you believed your wife needed safety. And then you watch as she dives headfirst into the very spotlight she claimed was destroying her. How would that feel? Betrayal doesn't even begin to cover it. It's humiliation. And then came the projects. The Netflix docuseries that painted the royals as villains. The Spotify podcast that quickly collapsed under criticism. The red carpet appearances, the glossy magazine features. Each one less about Harry and more about Meghan. She positioned herself as the feminist voice, the survivor, the fighter. Harry? He was the supporting act. The man who sat beside her, nodding. The prince who had been reduced to a prop. The irony is brutal. Harry thought he had given Meghan the world. But in reality, Meghan had taken Harry's world and made it her stage. The monarchy was never her prison. It was her launchpad. And the emotional cracks began to show. Insiders say Harry struggled with his role in California. He didn't belong in Hollywood circles. He wasn't comfortable on red carpets. He wasn't thriving in the spotlight. He was shrinking. And Meghan? She only shone brighter. The imbalance grew. The distance widened. Until Harry began to see what everyone else had whispered all along. This was never about him. But here's where the betrayal deepens. Meghan's California life wasn't just about building a brand with Harry. It was about proving she could exist without him. Independent projects. Solo appearances. Separate networks. Slowly, she began to carve out an identity that didn't need Harry at all. Can you imagine what that did to him? The man who gave up everything now realized he was dispensable, replaceable, optional. And the more Meghan thrived, the more Harry crumbled. He admitted to friends that he missed Britain, that he missed his family, that he regretted the choices he had made. But by then, it was too late. The bridges were burned. The palace doors were closed. And Meghan? She had no reason to look back. So here's the haunting question. Was California always the goal? Was Meghan's marriage to Harry simply the vehicle to get her there? Because if Harry's confession is true, then the answer is chilling. Yes, the move to California wasn't an escape. It was the plan. And Harry's growing isolation, his deep regret, his emotional unraveling, all of it was the price of that plan. But California was only the stage. The true betrayal wasn't geography. It wasn't even fame. It was what Meghan did once she had it all. How she used